using some force. HM? MMM. After twitching her tail, she opened her crimson eyes. HM? You. Seems like something's happened. Those words snapped a half-asleep Crush to full wakefulness. Frostpain lay by his side, and after taking it up he rose to his feet, followed shortly by Crush. The two of them headed outside, and they immediately realized the source of the disturbance. The sky above the village was covered in a thick layer of dark clouds. When they looked into the distance, they realized that these clouds were different from regular clouds, because the sky in the distance was bright and clear. In other words, this meant that, they're coming again? A signal of another enemy attack, looks like it. Crush agreed with his assessment. Debate broke out among the lizard men of the 5 tribes as they gazed into the cloudy sky. However, there was no fear on their faces. That was because they had achieved victory even in these dire circumstances, and it had made them all stronger. The two of them ran to the main gate of the village, accompanied by the sound of splashing. They passed several lizard men preparing for battle, and reached their destination before long. There were many warrior lizard men gathered at the main gate, and everyone was peering outside. There were some familiar faces among them, including Zenburu, who had fought and bled with them, and the chief of the Little Fong tribe beside him. Zenburu waved to the two of them as they splashed over, and then jerked his chin to indicate that they should look outside the gate. Zaryusu and Crush stood by Zenburu's side, and looked in that direction. Facing them, on the other side of the boundary between the marsh and the forest, were serried ranks of skeletons. So they've come again. Zaryusu clicked his tongue after answering Zenburu. They had expected as much, but this was still too quick. They had thought that the heavy losses that they had inflicted would take the enemy some time to replace. As it turned out, they had been completely off the mark. Their foe had actually mobilized such a large army in such a short time. Still, they ought to be weaker than the skeletons which that elder lich summoned. There was a hidden meaning to those words. Zenburu was implying that the skeletons before then were stronger than the skeletons that had attacked earlier. Zaryusu kept his eyes trained on the skeletons facing them. This was in order to grasp their opponent's strength and prepare the appropriate defenses. Indeed, they were all skeletal creatures, but they were dramatically different from the skeletons they had fought previously. By looks alone, the biggest difference lay in their equipment. The previous skeletons were only armed with rusted swords, but these skeletons had full sets of gear. In addition, they looked more presentable than those from the earlier encounter. There seemed to be 3 broad classes of personal equipment on the skeletons present. Most of the skeletons were outfitted in breastplates, bearing an inverted triangle shield, a heater shield, in one hand, and all manner of hand weapons in the other. They even had quivers and bows on their backs. These armed skeletons were fully equipped for attack and defense, and for fighting at close or long range. Then, there were skeletons who were similarly accoutered with breastplates, but sporting tattered red capes and helmets, wielding bastard swords and round shields. The last group comprised the least numerous, but best-equipped skeletons. They wore suits of shiny golden full-plate armor and gripped shiny pikes. Not a single spot of dirt marred their brilliant red capes. As Zaryusu inspected them, he realized something. He rubbed his eyes several times, wondering if they were mistaken. However, the reality before him remained as it was. No way. How could this be? Crush realized that Zaryusu was muttering in a pained voice as she gasped in shock. Just then, Zenburu spoke up. Oh, it seems you noticed too. Zenburu's voice sounded similarly tortured. Zaryusu stopped there. He did not want to continue, because he would be afraid if he continued to speak, but he had to say it. Those look like magic weapons. Crush nodded steadily from beside him. All the weapons wielded by the skeleton army were magical in nature. Some had flaming swords, while others had hammers crackling with electricity. Some had pikes whose heads were sheathed in green light, while others had scythes which dripped a viscous purple fluid. Not just that. Take a look at their armor and shields. They're all enchanted as well. Zaryusu took a closer look as he heard Zenburu speak. And then, he groaned in dismay. That was because Zariusa realized that those shiny suits of armor did not reflect the sun's light, but seemed to glow from within. What kind of ruler could outfit this many skeletons in magic items? If it was only a matter of simple sharpening enchantments, Zariusa had heard that certain great nations could amass quantities like this after long planning. However, imbuing this many magic weapons with elemental properties, and in the variety before him, was another matter entirely. Zariusa remembered the dwarves Zenbru had spoken of several days ago. The dwarves were a mountain-dwelling species, who possessed exceptional skill concerning metal. During a drinking party, the dwarves had once shared a heroic legend, that of the emperor who founded the Dwarven Empire, a hero clad in adamantite armor, a man who felled dragons by himself, and the magesmith of the 13 heroes. Even those legends had not spoken of an army, over 5,000 strong, of this size, outfitted in magical equipment like this. Then, what was Zariusa looking at now? Is that an army from the legends? If they had not come from a human myth, then it must have come from some kind of divine legend. Zariusa shuddered. He realized that he had challenged a foe who was not only beyond his expectations, but one that should never have been provoked. However, he had gathered everyone here with the intention to die. How could someone who had come up with such a ridiculous plan be afraid now? He already knew this foe was beyond the bounds of his imagination. The solution was how they would deal with it. It can't be. That must be an illusion or something. As everyone heard those words, a look crossed their faces which seemed to say, "What rubbish are you spouting?" Their enemy was not moving, but they felt real enough. They emanated a frightful presence, and they could not possibly be mere illusions. Still, these doubt-inducing words were spoken by the chief of the small Fong tribe. He had not said them because he had gone mad. What basis do you have for that? In response to Zariusa's question, the small Fong chieftain replied confidently, "We've sent out rotating scout patrols, but nobody reported seeing undead like that. There's no way we wouldn't have spotted them if they were in such numbers. Of course, all the scouts we sent out returned safely." I see. Still, I don't think they're illusions. But no, maybe they're not. If they aren't illusions, maybe they burrowed through the earth or used similar means of movement. A tunnel would explain why they weren't spotted earlier. It doesn't matter if they dug through the ground or flew through the sky, what do we do about them? Though it doesn't look like they're going to fight just yet, they don't look like they want to negotiate either. That seems to be the case, although, given the present circumstances, I feel the enemy is going to try something. Zariusa stared at the skeletal army. He was looking for their commander, and then, a gust of bone-freezing wind blew over them. It was not a one-time occurrence, the chill wind blew over and over. This preternaturally frigid wind was not a natural phenomenon. There was no doubt that it was the result of magic. Wind? It can't be. Isn't this the same kind of magic? How is that even possible? Crush trembled as she hugged herself. She did not look like she was doing so purely because of the cold, so Zariusa asked, "Crush, what's with this cold wind? You might not believe me if I say this, but please listen to me. I originally thought that the weather changes from before were the result of the 4th tier spell control clouds, but I was wrong. Control clouds can control clouds, but it cannot generate cold winds like this. Therefore, this isn't just controlling clouds, but altering the weather. In other words, I think the enemy used a 6th tier spell, control weather." Crush lowered her voice so nobody could hear, and continued, "However, that spell is beyond my ability to use, so I'm not too sure if that's the case." Zariusa knew how shocking spells of the 6th tier were. Magic like that was beyond even Igva, the strongest opponent Zariusa had ever fought, and it was considered the most powerful form of magic in the world. Is this the power of the Supreme One? I see, that would explain it. If he could use magic of the 6th tier, then the title of Supreme would be well deserved. Oi oi oi, when I look around at everyone, it doesn't look good. Zenbru's mumbling highlighted the mood in the air. Such cold winds could not blow in this weather. In other words, this was a supernatural change in the environment that was beyond their ability to comprehend. The lizardmen's morale plummeted to rock bottom. Previously, only clouds had appeared. The priests could still control clouds if they gathered together, built a huge bonfire, and conducted a ritual. However, when the lizardmen felt the chill kiss of this autumn-like wind, they realized how powerful their foe was to be able to manipulate such normally uncontrollable natural phenomena. Even without Crush's words, the constantly blowing wind clearly illustrated just how powerful their upcoming opponent was. Che, they're making their move. Zariusu gritted his teeth and suppressed the urge to swish his tail with sheer force of will. So they're moving out now? He thought. The warrior lizardmen panicked as the skeletal army advanced with steps with such regularity that they seemed to have been measured with a pace stick. Some of them even growled in warning. However, Zariusu was baffled as he watched the skeletal army move. That was not a prelude to battle. Just as Zariusu and Zenburu were about to ask the panicking lizardmen to calm down, "Calm yourselves." A shout that swallowed the land and shattered the sky rang forth. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice. Their eyes settled on Chisuryu. "I say again, calm yourselves." The only thing that could be heard in this silent space was his confident, dignified voice, echoing in their ears. "Also, do not be afraid, warriors. Do not disappoint the ancestors who stand behind you." Chisuryu passed through the quiet, now calm lizardmen and came to Zarius's side. "Little brother, what's the enemy done now?" Anija. "They've started moving, but they don't seem to be getting ready for a fight." Mew. The 500 skeletons who moved out formed up into 10 ranks. "What are they doing?" As though waiting for that question, the skeletal army moved again. With perfect coordination, they split in two from the center, leaving a space between them that was rough. 20 skeletons in size. Within that space was a figure. It was not very large. Even at a distance of 250 meters, it was clearly smaller than Zariusu. It wore a black robe and radiated a dreadful aura of evil. It looked similar to the Elder Lich they had fought yesterday, so it was probably a magic caster as well. However, the key difference between the two was their power. A chill ran up Zarius's spine as he saw it. His instincts told him that the difference between the being before him and the Elder Lich from yesterday was like the difference between a warrior and an infant. Even at this range, he could feel the ice-cold and malevolent presence it emanated. In addition, its equipment was in a league of its own. It was like an avatar of irresistible death, an absolute ruler. A ruler of death, is it? The words which fell unbidden from Zarius's mouth perfectly described the monster before him. Indeed, that person was a king that ruled death. Oh. What did this ruler of death have in mind? The lizardmen panicked as one as they looked at that lord of extinction. Just then, an magic array roughly 10 meters across expanded from around that magic caster in a hemisphere. On the hemisphere were translucent sigils that resembled letters and symbols, glowing with a bluish-white light. These sigils shifted with bewildering speed, each different from one moment to the next. The clear blue light changed shape continuously, illuminating the surroundings in phantasmagoric radiance. If this were not the work of an enemy, perhaps they might have been entranced by it, but right now they were not in the mood for such things. Zariusu, unable to understand what was going on, felt confused. Most magic casters would not project magic arrays like that into the air when casting their spells. The enemy's actions were far beyond Zariusu's knowledge. Therefore, Zariusu asked the female who knew the most about magic, "What is that?" I don't know. "I don't know what that is either," Crush's reply sounded a little afraid. It would seem her knowledge of magic made her even more frightened of this unknown phenomenon. Just as Zariusu was about to comfort her with a pat, perhaps the spell had cast, but the magic circle fragmented and transformed into countless motes of light, which flew to the sky. And then they spread from the air, like an explosion, and the lake froze over. Nobody had any idea what was going on. There was the outstanding Chief Chisuryu, the incredibly talented Priestess Crush, and the widely traveled Zariusu. Even these individuals, who were extraordinarily gifted in their respective fields, could not immediately comprehend what was happening at the moment. They had no idea why their feet were stuck in the ice. Soon after their brains managed to parse what was going on, the cries of despair rang out. Indeed, every lizard man was wailing. Even Zaryusu was doing so. Crush, Shisuryu, and even Zenbru, the boldest of them all, was no exception. The terror which sprang from the deepest reaches of their souls drove them to cry out in fear. The scene before their eyes was too horrific to bear. The lake which could never freeze, which had never frozen ever since they had been born, was now a solid sheet of ice. The lizard men hurriedly raised their feet. Fortunately, the ice was not very thick and broke immediately, but the shattered portions immediately froze back over. The bone-chilling cold from below proved that this was no mirage. In a panic, Zaryusu hurriedly scaled a dirt wall, and looked around, and then he was dumbstruck by the ridiculous sight around him. Everything, as far as his eyes could see, was frozen over. It was impossible to imagine that such a huge lake could have frozen solid, yet the glittering ice before his eyes was reality. Zaryusu feared for the fish farms, but now was not the time to worry about such things. No way. Crush, who had climbed up with Zaryusu to look around, was just as dumbfounded as he was. A despondent voice came from her gaping mouth. Much like Zaryusu, she could not believe what she was seeing. Monster! He cursed loudly. At the same time, he hoped that the cursing would somewhat ameliorate the terror in his heart. Get them up here, his brother Shisuryu bellowed. Several lizard men had already collapsed. The warrior lizard men who could still move worked together to extricate their fallen friends from the frozen swamp. The lizard men who had collapsed were ghastly pale, and shook uncontrollably. Perhaps the cold had stolen their vitality. Anija, I'll go take a look around. With frost pain in hand, Zaryusu would not be affected by cold effects of that level. No, don't go. Why, Anija? The enemy ought to be making their move soon. I forbid you to leave this place. Grasp the situation, and don't let any information slip past you. You've traveled the world and accumulated all sorts of knowledge, you're the only one who can handle that task. Shisuryu's eyes left Zaryusu, and he spoke to the warriors around him. I will now cast a spell that will defend against the cold, protection energy ice. Tell everyone in the village not to touch the ice. I'll help with the spells too. Thank you. Crush, you split up from me. Heal anyone in critical condition. Crush and Shisuryu began casting spells on the now safe lizard men. Zaryusu remained on the dirt wall, his keen gaze intently focused on the enemy formation, and taking in every move the enemy made. He had to carry out the mission his elder brother had entrusted to him. There we go. Zenburu, who had climbed up beside him, leisurely regarded the enemy forces. Come on, loosen up a little. Your big bro's counting on your knowledge, right? He won't scold you if you miss something. What's more important is that you don't get overly focused and develop tunnel vision. Zenburu's relaxed tone helped cool Zaryusu's head down. Much like how they had done in the battle with the Elder Lich, they could divide the load among themselves and work together, while he oversaw everything. Zaryusu looked around and found that the warriors were climbing the dirt walls and observing the enemy. Indeed, he was not fighting alone, but with everyone. It would seem he had been rattled by that overpowering force, by that spell. Zaryusu exhaled, as if to expel the accumulated unclean air within himself. Sorry. Nothing to be sorry about. That's true, because you're here too, Zenburu. Ha, don't look at me when it comes to brainwork. Their eyes met and they laughed. Then they turned their attention back on the enemy. Still, that's one hell of a monster out there. Yes, it's on a completely different level. The King of Death regarded Zaryusu and the Lizard Man village with a majestic gaze as he stood, like the ruler of this world and the next. What should have been a tiny object in the distance seemed to have expanded to dozens of times its actual size. He ought to be that supreme one they were talking about. Most likely. I hope he's the only one who can freeze a lake with magic like that. Yeah, me too. We lizard men must look like tiny ants to someone who can pull off something like that. Damn it. We're nothing more than worms to him. Speaking of which, they're moving. The magic caster who had frozen the lake raised the hand, which was not holding a staff, and waved it at the village. He must be giving an order, Xerios's instincts told him, and in the next moment his instincts were validated in a horrifying way. Oh! The voices came from everywhere in the village. What is that? What the hell is going on? Xerios had thought he could no longer be surprised, but after seeing what was before him, he could not help but wail in response. Before his eyes was a massive statue hewn of stone, with a pair of arms and legs. Its sturdy, slab-like chest pulsed with red light, like a heartbeat. Its limbs were thick and stubby, and it looked almost adorable. Well, it would have been, if it were not over 30 meters tall. This massive stone statue suddenly appeared from the forest. Calling it an illusion might actually have been easier to swallow. The statue moved slowly, and produced a gigantic boulder out of nowhere. And then, it tossed the boulder. Xerios reflexively shielded his eyes. Certain death awaited anyone who was hit by that huge rock. The earth shuddered and a tremendous crash assaulted Xerios in that world of darkness. The dirt wall shook violently. After that was the sound of heavy rain, of the sand and debris which had been tossed up falling back to the earth. It was accompanied by surprised cries from the village. They were prepared to die, but they were not prepared for this unimaginable terror. The shocking lesson from just now made even the veterans of that battle shriek like children. Xerios breathed a sigh of relief as he realized that he was still alive. As he nervously opened his eyes, he saw the undead army on the move, and he noticed that the gigantic statue was nowhere to be seen. The huge rock which had not been there before now stood between the two forces. The undead troops approached the rock, and then they fell to one knee after raising their shields as if to block the sky. The other skeletons jumped up on those shields, and after nimbly maintaining their balance, they raised their shields as well. In the moment that Xerios realized what the enemy was doing, he trembled all over, as if he had been struck by lightning. Don't tell me, stairs? They're using a legendary army like that as stairs. The skeletons drew close to the giant rock with startling speed, and then the staircase formed by the undead army finally took shape. Then, the other undead soldiers made their move. They looked more refined than the skeletons from earlier, and there were about 100 of them. They held lances with banners attached, of the kind that lancers might carry. The bright red cloth, their banners, were embroidered with the same sigil. Their capes rippling in the wind, these undead marched onto the marsh with immaculate coordination. They crunched the ice under their feet as they advanced in silence. Then, another group of skeletons marched onto the marsh with the same fluid movements, taking care to maintain the proper spacing from the first group. They crossed their lances with those of the warriors opposite them. The crossed lances formed a passage which led to the huge rock. Is that a king's path? Zenburu was right. The magic caster of death walked down the path made by the undead. The silhouettes of several people were visible behind it. Nobody had noticed their arrival. At their head walked the magic caster of unfathomable might. He was dressed in a black robe that seemed to be made of darkness itself, and an ebony radiance emanated from the staff he carried. That radiance shaped itself into the tormented faces of human beings, which dissolved and disappeared into nothing. Beneath the hood of his robe was a skeletal face, and within its empty eye sockets danced points of bright red light. He was adorned with countless items of magical jewelry, the likes of which were beyond Xerios's comprehension. He strode forth with the air of a monarch. A pale-skinned female trailed behind the King of Death. She resembled a human being, but she differed from them in one key respect, which would be the wings at her waist. Could she be a demon? Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit demons. There were devils who destroyed with brute force and fiends who corrupted with intellect. These outsiders were collectively known as demons. They were said to be monsters of legendary cruelty and malice, who existed to destroy all intelligent beings of good alignment. Their names were a byword for evil. Zarius had heard of demons during his travels. He had heard of their fearsome nature. Apparently, 200 years ago there was a monster who was a king of demons, the demon god.